Father Mayo. Listening to the recent confession where mention was made of the Glasgow Rozzers, I was... let's not get into that again, because that isn't a particularly Glaswegian term. It was just like an ad-lib that happened at the time. I was reminded of an unfortunate incident in which I was involved in 1992. Back then, I was a young, fresh-faced and naive probationary constable in Glasgow, and on the day in question, I was sent to see the duty officer, Inspector Jardine. It's yourself, young Stuart. No, I'm not going to even attempt. But,
really?
Yes. It's yourself, young Stuart, he said. And when I arrived, there's a prisoner I need watching. He's only been brought in a few hours ago, and he's ranting and fighting with everybody. Now, you'll only need to watch him for an hour or so. Then you'll be relieved by an officer from Bishop Briggs, as he's their prisoner. But I'll check on him in a wee while if he's calmed down. I'll release him for a report. OK. Keep him calm. I thought, keep him calm and he'll get out. Easy enough. I realised if all went well, I could still make the big card school, which took place during the refreshment break at 3 a.m. These are very important issues.
Different times.
Maybe. Ian Rankin could have written this one.
Yeah.
Satisfied this was something I could handle, I took the lift to the 4th floor, where the observation cell was situated. But instead of a ranting and raving prisoner, my man was tucked up in his blue plastic-covered mattress and fast asleep. Delighted that an easy night and a card game was ahead of me, I settled down to the deep recesses of the easy chair and I picked up a magazine. Shortly afterwards, my prisoner aroused from his slumbers and, peeking out from under his itchy blanket, looked, I have to say, rather alarmed. The prisoner then got up and signalled through the glass wall that he urgently wanted to speak with me. I went out into the cell passageway, where I then opened the small hatch in the middle of the sturdy steel cell door. The prisoner, who turned out to be a well-spoken chap from the leafy suburbs, clearly didn't know where he was. So he asked me. He feared the very worst when I said he'd been arrested, because he said, "Don't you come in here." What's wrong with that? What's wrong?
Okay.
It's my leafy suburb voice.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Don't you come in here. I've seen that film, Midnight Express. I don't want you in here. On learning the grisly details of his arrest for going daft inside and then outside a pub in sleepy Kirkintilloch, followed by a bout of going bananas at the charge bar and assaulting various police officers, he muttered the now ubiquitous excuse for public buffoonery, which was, "Somebody must have spiked my drink, boss," which is what he said. But of greater concern to the gentleman, it turned out, were the presence or whereabouts of his new Timberland boots. A birthday gift from his wife, as it turned out. "Don't worry," I said, as I picked up the boots from outside his cell and I showed them to him. "What about my jacket?" he says, as he turned his head sideways and poked it out of the hatch for a good look at the floor. "Right, what about my jacket?" He's looking there. "Yes, it's here too. Now pop your head back into the cell. The duty officer is going to visit you soon, and if you're calm, you can go home." "OK, boss," says the prisoner, who then attempted to pull his head back through the hatch.
Oh, no.
Whereupon it became wedged fast. Realising we had a predicament between us, we attempted the only course of action we knew. He pulled inwards whilst I pushed on the crown of his head. However, it wouldn't budge, and our technique was apparently quite painful, as the prisoner's ears bent back and forwards like the flapping gills of a stranded fish.
Oh, lovely. What a picture.
It was at this point I heard the approach of the service lift and surmised correctly that Inspector Jardine would soon be with us. This meant that not only was I in big trouble, but more importantly, there would be no card school for me that morning. Inspired by my rising panic, I rushed down the corridor to the sink as the prisoner howled away in agony. To make matters worse, the other prisoners on the floor were now rousing and clearly not best pleased, as they shouted a number of words that I hadn't heard before and won't be writing down here. At the sink, I picked up the bar of pink carbolic soap, soaked it in water, ran back to the cell hatch and rubbed the prisoner's now bright red ears vigorously. Suitably soaped up, I then gave one last strong shove to the top of his head and he popped back into the cell. If you'll imagine, like the opposite of a champagne cork coming out of the bottle. It's not really like that at all. I closed the hatch just as the lift doors opened, plonked back down in my seat and picked up the magazine as if I'd been there for ages. As Inspector Jardine walked into the room, the prisoner was hopping frantically about his cell in the style of John Cleese's Basil Fawlty, clutching his swollen ears and screaming blue murder, accompanied by the very grumpy shouts from the other prisoners. "Oh dear goodness," exclaimed the inspector, as Glaswegian inspectors are prone to do. "We'll need to keep this man for the court. He needs to be seen by the duty psychiatrist." Standing to attention, I replied, "Yes, sir. He's been like this for some time, and I didn't want to disturb you, sir." Well, Father Mayo, I seek forgiveness not only for my careless inattention that followed the poor prisoner to poke his head out of his cell hatch contrary to forced standing orders and common sense, nor do I seek forgiveness for the extra paperwork, such as risk forms, that I caused for my inspector through not fessing up. But instead I seek your forgiveness, your compassionate forgiveness, for my transgression against my dear older and wiser colleague Roger from the neighbouring Bishop Briggs police force, who had to spend the rest of the long, long night watching the prisoner when he should have instead been tucked up in his panda car on Little Hill Golf Course with a cup of coffee. He also missed the big card school that night, which had a top prize of £10. Yeah. Anyway, it's the latest from Superintendent Stewart, which Ian Rankin would knock that up into his latest bestseller in a couple of years' time. Or maybe just a little incident in there. Well, it had a little bit of carry-on in there as well. Superintendent Stewart, what do you think of that, Sister Bobby?
Well, Superintendent Stewart, I don't know why he just didn't come clean. Because what that meant is the prisoner couldn't go home, and obviously they were upset. So
I think he was going to get into trouble for allowing the prisoner to stick his head out the window.
So it'd be his fault. So basically, yeah, but of course then two other things happened that are not fair. Yeah, because prisoner Big Boots got kept in for longer than he should have done. Then his friend, no, I don't. Superintendent Stewart, although funny, very funny, you are not forgiven.
Yeah, that's certainly true, because he did allow the prisoner to stay in there for a lot longer.
Well,
yeah.
Yes, I mean, here's the point. He had no control over prisoner Big Boots deciding to stick his head out of a cell hatch. Now, I have limited knowledge of the size of cell hatches, but from having watched the bill, they're really tiny things. Who thinks they're going to stick their head through that and be
Someone
able to
with a small head?
Absolutely, yes. And
from the leafy suburbs of Glasgow.
Clearly, with that accent. So I'm going to forgive, because he doesn't have any control over your man and his tiny wee head. And also great reference to Midnight Express. What a great movie. So I am going to forgive.
Radio 2 here, it's Drive Time, and we have another Drive Time confession. This one comes from Jane. You'll have noticed that the Dean of Deadliness has
I slipped in quietly there, did you notice that?
First appearance of the week, we also noticed that.
All right.
Dear Father Simon and the Forgiving Collective, I write to beg forgiveness for a terrible event which occurred in my formative years. My confession involves a popular music band and a particular song from the late 80s which you played recently on your show. I recognised that when you played this song, it was a sign. It was a sign from above, a sign of encouragement for me to finally offload my shame and regret. My shameful event occurred in the early 90s during my student years. While normally being of a studious nature, working hard for my teaching qualification, I did on occasion enjoy the odd night out and some male company to break the routine of lectures, course projects and exams. Taking a break from my studies, I was lucky enough to secure some concert tickets to see the big band at the time, Manchester favourites James. The tickets were a gift from my new boyfriend Des. We'd been together a few months and this was our first concert together. The venue was the Glasgow Barrowlands Ballroom. James were very much at the height of their fame, and in Scotland, Barrowlands the place to see any act, with its specially sprung dance floor, which would bounce along with the crowd, and the excellent acoustics, which made for a great concert atmosphere. With such a big night ahead and the likelihood that a few drinks would be had, I took the sensible option of having a big dinner, just to line my stomach and hopefully prevent too much impact from the alcohol. By the way, I should have said at the beginning of this confession,
yes,
if you're eating, there might be a challenge. There might be a challenge involved in actually getting through to the end of your meal.
I felt sick already.
Thank you for the
forewarned. Being a student of limited budget and culinary skills, a big meal meant a baked potato, tuna, and extra flourish of sweet corn. A tour of the bars around Glasgow preceded our arrival at Barrowlands. Despite having had quite a few drinks, I still had the good sense to grab a bag of chips just to keep me nourished before we entered. The chippy would be mobbed when we came out, and we needed to rush for the train after the show. I needed something to soak it all up and minimise the potential for a hangover. When we entered Barrowlands, the place was buzzing, jam-packed with lager-fueled teens ready for a rocking night. The mosh pit was the only place for me. Dr. Mosh would have been proud of my spirit.
Hey!
Dr. Mosh is on later, of course. The band arrived on stage to rapturous reception and the gig kicked off. They ran through their repertoire. The crowd absolutely loved it. The sprung dance floor seemed to defy gravity and the laws of physics, and we all bounced and swayed along to each song. The songs rang out. She's a Star, Born of Frustration, all the hits, the music, the lights, the crowd. This was the best concert I'd ever been to. As the crowd got further into the moment, the pushing, the swaying, the jumping seemed to increase in intensity. At first it was thrilling, then excess adrenaline seemed to kick in. I started to come over a little bit woozy.
Oh, no.
This feeling grew, and I was now starting to feel a little faint. The wise thing to do is to stand still, hold on tight to Des, gather my senses, and take deep breaths. This seemed to work initially, but then I could feel the sickness rise in my stomach, and standing in the middle of the mosh pit, I knew what was about to arrive.
Oh, no.
I've cut out the next paragraph.
Oh, that's good. Thank you for that.
Well, Father Simon, the feeling didn't pass, and you can guess the rest. A few more lines I missed out there.
Yes.
However, the crowd was still bouncing away, oblivious to my unfortunate state, and also oblivious to the fact that their baggy jeans and suede boots were now decorated in a whole new way.
No.
Pebble dashed, I say. To seek forgiveness at this stage would seem a reasonable thing, but it didn't end there. My flight reflex kicked in, and I knew the right thing to do was to evacuate from the area and hope nobody noticed what had happened. Or, yes, evacuate.
We need evacuate.
Or at least who the culprit was. As I pushed my way out of the mosh pit towards the exit and the fresh air, the band finished their song, the crowd cheered and relaxed. What happened next could not have been more badly timed. As I moved out of the mosh pit, I heard the band strike up with the opening line, "Sing myself to sleep."
Oh, no.
The next song was Sit Down. As all good James fans know, one of the main crowd pleasers and community building moments is their big hit, Sit Down. The normal protocol for the crowd is to do as the band suggest and sit down. Well, you can imagine the next few minutes of mayhem which took place. Father Simon, I do beg forgiveness, and there is a long list. Here we go.
Right.
I beg forgiveness for the poor souls who sat down in a large patch which I had provided across the mosh pit. I beg forgiveness from the security staff who mistook the commotion as some kind of fight and moved into the mosh pit to intervene, only to slip and slide, a bit like the Keystone Cops. I beg forgiveness to the crowds of people queuing at the toilets while furious girls and boys tried to clean their hands and jeans in toilet facilities while they're desperate for a wee. I beg forgiveness from the mothers and some fathers who were faced with cleaning the clothes of their kids the next morning whilst disbelieving the explanation of what had happened. I beg forgiveness from Des, who had bought the tickets on a limited budget but ended up the night with an embarrassment of a date. I beg forgiveness from the James fans, who will feel a bit queasy next time they hear Sit Down, especially at a concert. I beg forgiveness from the listeners to your great show who are sitting down to dinner at this time. And, of course, I beg forgiveness from James, a great band who, during their great concert, were faced with half an audience sitting down for their main crowd pleaser, and the other half caught up in a commotion of vomit and confusion. Normally these stories have a romantic ending, says Jane. After many decades, Des and I are still happily married, that kind of thing. However, this is not the case, and he dumped me a few weeks later, stating irreconcilable differences or some such nonsense. Anyway,
Well,
Jane,
there we go. What?
Well, it was, it's nicely told, and she went to see James, and they sat down, but she'd lined her stomach, but the lining didn't last. She has so many people who need to forgive her. Let's see how she does with Sister Rebecca.
Being sensible, wasn't she, trying to line her stomach? I mean, that was actually the responsible thing to do, because if she hadn't, it may have been even worse. And it's really bad luck that that particular song came along and everyone sat down. I mean, how many bands are there where the audience actually has to sit down during one of their songs? I mean, probably just James.
They just didn't know what they were sitting in.
Yeah, no. I just don't think it would have made any difference. I mean, she ran away, which is a bit cowardly of her, but would it have made any difference if she told the individuals, actually, that was me, whose vomit you're sitting in, my vomit you're sitting in? Jane, you are forgiven.
Forgiven, okay, excellent. Let's see what the Dean of Deadliness...
Yeah, I think forgive. It's 20-odd years ago. It's 20-odd years ago, and it was an accident. You didn't mean to do it, and as Rebecca said, you did the lining of the stomach for all the right reasons, so I think forgiven.
Okay, so it's a mosh pit confession.
Yes. Here's my problem with this, is that I much as I'm a big fan of James and all their work, Come Home, Born of Frustration, all very good tracks, sometimes. That said, I have a massive problem with Sit Down, and in fact I have a bigger problem with people who sit down during a concert. Because look at me, I'm sitting down on the floor, thumbing my nose at convention when everyone else is standing up. Look at me, counterculture, blah blah blah. Well, I say no, and you've got what you deserved. Quite right, you've got that all over your pants. How much of a thumbing nose at convention do you feel like now? Not very much, I would say.
I have to share an office with this man.
Yes,
Can I just?
And I say for that reason, definitely forgiven. They had it coming.
I think just a smidgen of a warning that if you're eating if you're having your tea, maybe just, rest for a moment, look the other way.
I love these. I love it when there's warnings.
I don't know. I might be overreacting just a little.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, James says, "Dear Father Simon, I write to you with no hope of forgiveness. None is possible, but more a tale of ultimate redemption. My story goes back to the early 1980s when I worked for a well-known major building contractor. The industry then was a far different place than it is today, and the horseplay or crack was legend. I worked in the procurement department with a team of 4, and I can say quite honestly it was the best time of my working life, with countless jokes, tricks and adventures." Matt would love spending time with you. He loves pranksters.
Love them.
Really? Really? We're going to have to do some more jokes today?
Oh, good.
Regularly, we took a trainee into our team for 6 months' experience in buying. They were usually pretty lippy, lively lads with an irrepressible confidence in their own ability and convinced that they were next year's MD. Oh, yeah. Well, you see, Simon, the construction industry is a pretty down-to-earth profession. We're always worried that these impressionable youths would suffer greatly at the hands of the site delivery team, so we saw it as our pastoral duty to prepare them for the future. We did this by demonstrating with practical examples what to look out for. This included normal things like ambushing them on the way to the post office, which ran through the churchyard, and jumping out from behind gravestones with a gusty boo. In fairness, we'd only do this when it was dark, so
that's okay then.
Fair enough.
That's fine.
There was also one memorable occasion when a cat lover called Chris was told about my own cat going in for a very delicate operation. All I'll say about this prank is that the day after the op, 2 fleshless cherries wrapped in some black cotton and placed in a water-filled plastic container on Chris's desk was all it took to send him running to the bathroom. And I might have popped them in my mouth as well at some stage. Anyway, all I say is all in good fun.
Yeah. I'm already writing Not Forgiven, by the way. Yeah.
But sadly, the event I want to bring before you cannot be covered under the cloak of staff improvement. This tale involves a very pleasant young lad called Nicholas, who joined us from a very rural background, and he was quite unused to the robust nature of our industry. In fairness, by the time Nicholas joined us, we had dialed back our training program when it came, until that is the day of the bumps. On this particular day, it was our estimator, a guy called Steve, who was going to be our victim. The plan was to bundle Steve into the car park and administer the bumps for his birthday. I know, different... Do they would do the bumps anymore?
I think you have to think it's too dangerous for people.
Well, because it was a fairly... In fact, because James then says, you might need to explain this for listeners who are unfamiliar with the tradition of the bumps. It's when you take the birthday boy or girl by the arms and legs and bump him or her up into the air and down onto the floor. The number of bumps given equals the age of the person in years +1 for luck.
What? Bumping them onto the floor?
Did you never do that at school?
I mean, bumping as in bump on the head.
No. You'd have someone on one arm, someone on your other arm, someone on a leg, someone on the other leg, and they go fling you up into the air, and then just gently you'd bounce on the ground.
Gently bounce on the ground from head
You never
height.
did that?
No.
Everyone did that.
Really?
What a deprived childhood
Yes,
you had.
clearly.
Bobby did it.
I did it, yeah.
Really?
It was a
Yeah.
school thing. I mean, obviously, once you get beyond a certain age, people go, I don't want any of that, thanks very much indeed.
funny
So
enough.
maybe it's not allowed anymore. But
Okay.
anyway, in these different times, this is what you did. So come lunchtime, says James, 4 of us, including Nicholas, cornered Steve in the kitchen, and despite his loud protests, we managed to drag him outside. With Nicholas tasked with holding Steve's right leg, we lifted him in the air and proceeded to give the birthday boy the first of his 45 bumps. And while Steve clearly wasn't having the time of his life, I could see that Nicholas was. He clearly felt like he was part of the team now. This is what he wanted more than anything else. He wanted to be accepted and to be part of the team.
Okay.
That was, Father Simon, right up until the 3rd bump, which is when Steve's right leg fell off. This was the one that Nicholas was holding. You see, what Nicholas didn't know was that Steve had an artificial leg, and he'd actually loosened the straps just before being lifted into the air. Steve was, of course, in on the whole affair. I did come clean afterwards to Nicholas, and while he refused to talk to any of us for at least a week, he slowly thought, you're not going to forget that, are you? After a couple of years, he eventually saw the funny side. Nicholas even progressed well within our company, very well prepared for life on site. So obviously I don't seek forgiveness, as there are no mitigating reasons for my acts, just high spirits and poor moral compass. But as I come to my 40th year in the industry, I have a large team of staff working for me, and I care strongly about their welfare, career, progression and happiness. And I like to think, and in some small part, this is due to the lesson that I learnt whilst working with Nicholas. Well, you know, it was just one of those japes, but, you know, I haven't had a line like that in a confession film, and that is when Steve's right leg fell off. Anyway, I'm just surprised you don't know the bumps. You learn everything. I imagine it died away a while back, because obviously in the wrong hands it could be an unpleasant experience. Sister Bobby, what are you saying?
I love this. I used to work in an office like this, and it was just survival every day, and great laughs, great. I mean, the thing is about when you go into those situations, from Nicholas's point of view, you just have to kind of grit your teeth. And they didn't do anything too dangerous or too nasty, did they? This was fabulous, because it seems like actually there were no losers. Just Nicholas, maybe, you know, just for a fearful moment, thought he had actually broken a human being completely.
There would be that moment where it would be just a couple of seconds.
Because the other thing is 45 bumps is way too much for anyone, especially that's why it's dangerous.
Well, it happened on the third.
Yes, luckily,
so
yeah.
Loosen your leg.
Of course, you don't need to be forgiven, as you say, but I would like more hijinks in the office, please.
Really?
Yeah, forgiven.
Okay, let's
forgiven,
not do
James.
that.
No. You could have hijinks in your office, which you share with the newsreader.
Yes, I'm sure they'd love that.
Jason will be up for Jason K. He likes a bit of japery.
High spirits. I'm going to say, I mean, I've made my feelings on pranks and japes and scamps pretty clear in the past, and I'm not a massive fan. However, this is very good. I mean, to have that open to you of saying, we are going to do this thing where each of us grabs a limb, and it turns out one of us has got a false limb, and let's not tell the person who's holding on to the false limb. All of us would have taken that, absolutely. So I am definitely going to forgive, because that is very well worked.
Father Simon in the Assemblage of Absolution. My desire for reprieve only takes me back a couple of months to the unfortunate day in question, but so strong is my need for pardoning that I write to you now in hope. Before I embark on the story, may I set some history of my husband's acquaintance with narrowboat life. I met him on a course, and during his studies his parents decided that the ideal student accommodation would be for him to live on a narrowboat in Oxford with his newly married brother and sister-in-law.
What?
Needless to say, being newlyweds, he tried to give them as much space as possible.
On a narrowboat?
Well, was it a wide beam or a narrow beam?
A little bit too technical there on the questioning. So his living situation consisted of a bunk at the far end of the boat. So he slept on the lower bunk and he stored all his stuff on the higher one. On the odd occasion I visited him there, the only sitting space was large enough for just one person on a small patch on the lower bunk. So my visit, therefore, consisted of taking turns, of either sitting on the lower bunk staring at my boyfriend's standing knees, the rest of him obscured by the higher bunk, or him sitting down, me standing and staring at the top of his head. Very romantic. Needless to say, my then boyfriend was not smitten by narrowboat life and all that went with it, but his acquaintance with canal life will have some forecast on the story to follow. You can't just waltz in halfway through, Nigel, and expect to pick it up. So just say, I'm sure that's fine, forgiven. Okay? All right.
Forgiven. Not yet, though.
Not yet.
No.
Fast forward to 2 months ago, and I was enjoying a pleasant dog walk one afternoon in early autumn in North Oxfordshire. Even more fortunate to be graced with my now husband for company, as he had unexpectedly accomplished his work early for the day. We'd enjoyed a chat-filled stroll across the fields, and were now on our return part of the circle route along the towpath of the canal in our heavenly village of Cropredy, where, of course, there's the wonderful music festival run by Fairport Convention, who do not feature in this particular tale, unless one of them is about to appear dressed as an old woman, which I don't think is likely. So lost in conversation was I that I barely noticed we were gradually catching up with an elderly lady. There she is. Is she from Fairport Convention? I don't think she is. Who was also walking along the same towpath. As we neared a bridge that had steps up towards the road, the lady turned to us and asked where the bridge would take her. I assumed she was looking for the shop, so informed her that the aforementioned steps would lead her up to where I thought she needed to go. Go ahead, go on, off you go. It was then that I noticed she was pulling a plastic box, which had strapped onto a wheelie pull-along trolley. Deducing that an elderly lady with a trolley and steep steps was not a good mix, I instantly offered to help her carry her trolley up to the store. In retrospect, I now understand her hesitation at not accepting my offer of help, and realise her expression was one of wonderment as to how she could politely decline. You might be ahead of me. But with my new eagerness to be the Good Samaritan, I promptly bent down and grabbed the dew-covered base of the trolley, proceeding to force the bewildered pedestrian up the steps. Go on! Up the steps, come on. I could now see the plastic box on the trolley more clearly, which appeared to contain some form of liquid as it sloshed around from my spontaneous grappling.
Yes, I know where this is
And as it so slopped, I also noticed some solid matter travelling past the slightly more transparent cap of the container. But in that instant, I realised that there was no way this dear woman of senior years would have managed to pull such a cumbersome item up steps. So to fuel my self-gratification, I announced to her, "Oh, it's very heavy, isn't it, this? What have you got in there?" She dithered at any form of reply, and I took her lack of agreement to be lack of gratitude. So pleased was I with my good self that I looked smugly over to my husband, who I expected to provide an approving look, but instead was met with a slow and deliberate shake of the head. His expression was that, had he not tried to be discreet, might well be have gestured as a cutthroat flick of the hand. In other words, a silent, "You really don't want to be doing what it is that you're actually doing." It was then, as we proceeded to ascend the steps, that I started to question my husband's wordless communication and surmised that his concern must be that he knew what the box contained. That combined with the fact that we were walking along a canal and his nostalgic knowledge of narrowboat conditions, in an instant I realised that my good deed may be to my own detriment, and that I had intruded into a stranger's most inner and yet outward private matter. At road height, I hastily positioned the trolley on the ground, sheepishly smiled at my unwilling subject of salvation, said bye, and dashed across the road, sloping back down to the canal to catch up with husband and dog, who had continued under the bridge on the towpath. I needed confirmation of my fears. Was that box a narrowboat Portaloo? I breathlessly inquired. Yes, it was, he said, condescendingly. What were you thinking? The full realization washed over me. This lady wasn't shop searching, but seeking the pump-out station across the canal, which was accessible over the bridge, not the shop. I had aided a poor unwitting person to ascend her own backlog, if you see what I mean, that I had spied into her most private of matters. And if that wasn't enough, I remembered what I'd said. "Oh, it's heavy, isn't it?"
Yes.
And I'd analysed the weight, and that wasn't really a nice thing to be doing. I'm going to leave out that next paragraph. I burst out into a nervous and hysterical laugh, short-lived by the realisation that the dew on my hands from the trolley may not be actually dew. Anyway, I shuddered and squirmed like a celebrity in a bug pit, egged on by Ant and Dec, only to realise mid-shudder in the corner of my eye a foreboding figure stood stock-still on the bridge, watching my every act of revulsion and realisation. It was, of course, the elderly lady, still frozen in embarrassment from my unwelcome outburst. So, Father Simon, I foraged for forgiveness, not out of my wish to metaphorically help an old lady across the road, although I must confess I may have offered help for my own self-gratification, but really for my abhorrent behaviour, after realising that I and she had been involved with that. I have visions of this poor lady now emptying the contents of her Portaloo under cover of the night time to avoid such situations, and ridiculously helpful women who just wander along towpaths and offer to help for no reason. She's Lorraine. I did give a warning, didn't I?
You did, yeah.
You have to be careful. Now, this is in your area of expertise, Bobby, isn't it?
Black water tanks, yes.
Yes, water
much
tanks
experience,
and
black water. We can call it black water tanks.
Life on the
road,
wave,
on wheels and boats and things. The thing is, this was a lovely thing to do, Lorraine. Regardless of the contents, they were sealed. It's not like you had a kind of open tub and it was slopping over the top. It was sealed. You might not have liked the idea of the contents, but I'm sure she was grateful anyway for the help, and she would have been absolutely fine. And you still carried it upstairs. You're looking at me like she had her hands in it.
I've not got as much experience of
thing
this.
It's sealed.
Is it transparent, the thing?
No, they can be, or they can't. Well, I've never known a transparent one. What I'm saying is, it was sealed. I don't know why you're making a funny face.
Okay.
She didn't spill it down herself, or she helped an old lady with a heavy load, regardless of the contents. Get over yourselves, you're fine. It was just a black water tank. Lorraine, of course you're forgiven, and you should do it again and again and again. Anytime you see any of us struggling to carry a big black tank.
The voice of practicality. Nigel would have no idea what was going on.
No, I knew. I caught up. I'm pretty mentally.
Speaking in a general sense.
What
about, is grey water then like shower water?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Black water's the other more solid stuff. Okay, private matter. Was she going in the right direction, the old lady? Was she going up there anyway?
No, she was supposed to go the other way.
Yeah, okay. So Lorraine, busybody on this occasion, you know, no, absolutely not.
Do you remember the Doobie Brothers song Black Water? Is that what it was about?
Oh, Black Water, keep
it.
on
Oh, Black
rolling,
Water,
Mississippi.
Well, you can't trust the Mississippi these days.
Well, not with...
As I've heard it
Mud
said.
pie has a whole new meaning, doesn't it?
Anyway, what are you saying there?
Yes, what am I
Matthew?
saying? I'm not going to forgive. And the reason I'm not going to forgive is because what she realised, Lorraine, she realised, oh, right, that's not what I think it is. And she should have turned round at that point and gone back to the old lady and said, obviously there's been an hilarious misunderstanding. Let me take you to the place where we dump all the black water. And she didn't do that. She just left the old lady at the top of the hill. And it's no good to her at all. That's why she was looking down. When are you going to come back and help me with me not transparent black water? Get over yourselves. Kind of
Keep on rising.
tank thing. Keep on. Yeah.
Mississippi Moon.
Mississippi. Yes. So great days. So therefore, not forgiven.
Dear Father Simon and the Confessional Courier, my story takes place over 30 years ago when I left the home counties to attend university in the glamorous city of Hull. Apart from the culture shock, my friends joked that maps simply indicated that the lands above Birmingham, there be dragons. Life as an undergraduate in this fine city proved very enjoyable indeed. Now, in case my children hear this confession, let me say that I spent my time as a new undergraduate diligently attending all my lectures and tutorials, studying hard in the library, abstaining from alcohol and ensuring that I was in bed at a respectable hour every night. Well, not much of that is true, but these were the heady days of student grants, cheap beer and plenty of joyful entertainment. Now, lots of confessions have started in this manner, but very few continue like this. Now, being a well-brought-up young man, I noticed that across the road from my halls of residence, there was a hospice looking after the elderly. Feeling a little ashamed of my several weeks of bacchanalian debauchery. First time that phrase has ever made it into a confession, by the way. Yes. Wow. I went over and offered my voluntary services to help in any way that I could, that anyway would be of use to the nurses there. Appreciative of the offer, I subsequently found myself every Tuesday evening pushing a tea trolley around the common room and serving tea to the folks there. They were a lovely bunch, but generally at a fairly advanced stage of dementia, which meant we had some unusual conversations. Being of Indian origin, occasionally I would elicit memories of their time spent in the subcontinent during colonial bygone days. Other times I would be mistaken for their doctor, and occasionally I would understand what made so-called comedy shows of that era, such as Mind Your Language, so popular. Overall, though, I began to enjoy these weekly visits, tempered by the realisation that the folks there were not there for long. Now, after a few weeks, on one cold Tuesday, December evening, I noticed a new guest. She was an elderly lady, body hunched from arthritis, who caught my eye as I entered the common room. What held my eye was her expression, which went from uninterested to puzzled, to recognition, to tearful joy. Getting up from her chair, her back straightened, and she approached me and took my hands. "It's you," she whispered. "You came back. You promised you'd come back." Now, being just 18, I was momentarily nonplussed and simply nodded. She then smiled and said, "Shall we dance?" Again, not knowing quite what to do, I nodded again. She then began to hum Johann Strauss's The Blue Danube, and we proceeded to waltz around the room. Her back was perfectly straight, and she was looking at me with tears in her eyes, and she kept on repeating, "I knew you'd come back." Then, with a look of mock disapproval, she added, "But you have forgotten how to waltz properly." And finally, I led her back to her chair and said I had to go. "But you will come back, won't you?" she asked, and I promised that I would. Over the following weeks, every Tuesday evening, the same pattern repeated itself. Her look of puzzlement, replaced by joy, our waltz around the room, and finally a promise that I would return. The two things which did alter were firstly that I learnt her name was Jill, and secondly, courtesy of the Hull University Ballroom Dancing Society, I was very patiently taught how to dance the waltz, so at least I would be eventually spared that criticism. Christmas came and I headed back home for several weeks of much-deserved rest and a lot of reading catch-up to complete. On returning in the new year that Tuesday, I went across the dark, rainy street to resume my weekly tea-serving duties. As I entered, one of the nurses called me over. "I'm so sorry," she said, "but Jill passed away over Christmas, but her daughter has asked me to give you this letter." Later that evening, I sat down to see what the letter said. And this is it. "Dear Sanjean, the nurses have told me how you dance with my mother every week, and if I may, I would like to offer you an explanation as to these curious events. During the First World War, my mother was a nurse in London, far from home. Feeling lonely, she began to attend a weekly tea dance, where she met a charming Indian soldier. He, too, was lonely and far from home. Before long, a friendship blossomed. Every week they would meet, drink tea, dance the waltz, and talk and talk and talk. Before long, they began to fall in love, but before this love could take any substantive form, the soldier was posted overseas to a front line somewhere. Their last meeting in the tea room was incredibly sad, but he promised that he absolutely would return. Now, the truth is, of course, he never did return from the war, and broken-hearted, my mother eventually met someone else, settled down, had a family, and a long and happy life. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for being so kind and giving Jill such joy in her final weeks. I wish you well." And that's the end of the letter that Sanjean got. So Sanjean finishes his email to me like this. "So, Father Mayo, I'm not really sure what I seek absolution for. Is it the sadness of a broken heart? I don't know. Now, maybe if I may, on this occasion, I would like to break with tradition, and rather than seek forgiveness, I would like to ask for your collective blessing, not for me personally, but indeed all acts of random kindness. For as Iris Murdoch wrote in The Bell, our actions are like ships which we may watch set out to sea and not know when or with what cargo they will return to port, in memory of Jill and her waltzing partner." And that's from Sanjean. And I think you'll agree that's a pretty extraordinary story. And Sanjean wanted it read as a confession. We've spoken to Sanjean. We're going to have him on the show tomorrow because it sounded like a whole movie there in just one brief-ish confession. So I guess you can just say whatever you like at this point. Michael Morpurgo, we asked you to come in because your book is full of stories like this. What do you think of that?
Well, my first reaction is I don't know why I bother to write fiction, because that was just such an extraordinary story, you couldn't have invented it. I have written several stories which are about memories, fading memories. I wrote one called The Best Christmas Present in the World, which is about a lady with dementia thinking that someone was someone else, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as that. What's wonderful about this, it has the power of truth. That's what's extraordinary about it. And it was beautifully told, too.
That's what I thought. Rebecca, what did you think of that story from Sanjean?
I think it definitely could have come from one of your books, Michael. It's a very touching and powerful story. I think the juxtaposition between the modern... Well, at that time, he was an 18-year-old, and her. She was at the other end of her life. And the fact that it had a physical effect on her back straightening up and everything.
Quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Very sweet as well that he went to learn to dance and learn to do the waltz in order to be able to dance with her properly. So, yeah, definitely gets my blessing for many reasons. But, yeah, wonderful story.
Sanjean sounds like one heck of a guy, Matt.
He does. Wow, that's had a profound impact on me, I think. Yeah. No, I'm really lost for words. If we were going to be forgiving, I'm not sure I'd be forgiving him for the impact it's had on me. It's absolutely wow.
Dear Father Simon and the Forgivers of Folly, I need to ask for your forgiveness for a totally unpremeditated sin dating back only 2 years to the summer of 2015. Not an awfully long time to carry my guilt, but a fifth of the lifetime of my 10-year-old son Carter, whose forgiveness I also seek. Driving through the Sussex countryside one sunny day, this particular summer back in 2015, myself in the front passenger seat and Carter sat immediately behind me, we passed a field full of gleaming solar panels. Carter, then aged 8 and a very inquisitive child, naturally asked, "What are those doing there?" And I simply answered, "It's a solar panel farm," and thought that would be ample explanation. "What's that then?" says the little voice behind my seat. And then I uttered the most logical reply and began down what became a lengthy path of deception. "It's where we grow solar panels."
Yeah.
Totally obvious, I thought. Perfectly logical answer. Potato farms grow potatoes. Hop farms grow hops. What else would a field of solar panels do? Thankfully, his dad managed to keep a straight face, and I resorted to clamping my hand over my mouth to smother my sniggering. But Carter's brain was in overdrive. How do they grow, then? After a small hesitation, well, You know the tiny solar panel in the corner of your calculator? Yes, says Carter. Well, those are really seed panels. They plant them in rows, and if they get enough sun and rain, they grow, and then when they're big enough, they get harvested and put on rooftops. Still perfectly sensible, if you ask me.
Yeah, love it.
A few minutes pass in silence, then... How do they know how far apart to plant them? Is the next question. So I had to think quick, but came up with, well, if the solar farmer, imagine, wants to grow 4-foot panels, he or she plants them 4 feet apart. Then when they're touching, they're just the right size. Phew, nearly caught me out on that one, but I escaped. The journey ended, life carried on in chaos, as it does with 4 kids, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a turtle, and 2 businesses. Blimey. Solar farms were a distant memory when Carter appeared around a corner a few days later with... So where do the tiny seed panels come from in the first place, then? Once I registered what he was talking about and got over the shock of a subject having stayed on his mind so long, I pulled myself together and replied, well, once the big panels have been on the roof too long, they don't work so efficiently. So they get taken down, cut into seed panels, and then reused. That's why solar panels are so environmentally friendly. I gave myself a mental high five and really thought that that would be it. What else could he possibly need to know about a solar panel? Well, Carter is an interesting character. He spends a lot of time on his own creating this and that and always has at least 5 projects on the go. So I don't know why I was surprised when a few days later, after laying the solar subject to bed, so I thought, he asked for some pocket money to buy a pocket calculator from the pound store in town. Yeah. And did I have a spare pot and some compost that he could borrow?
Quite right.
Well, what could I do? I'd painted myself into a corner. A trip to town followed, and Carter delighted in taking the calculator to pieces with his set of screwdrivers. The pot was filled, the seed panel placed on top and watered, then placed in the sunniest spot just outside the back door where he'd be able to water it and check its growth each day. I'm actually now, this is only of use to Matt and Bobby. I've got a photograph of him doing just that, okay?
Oh, superb.
It's a lovely photograph,
Yes,
you can imagine, of an 8-year-old lad, very proud.
He's so excited. He can't wait for it to grow into a massive panel.
Like growing cress.
Who's going to disappoint him now, I wonder?
He's pointing at the pot where this huge panel is about to grow
here
from.
It comes, everyone.
Well, Carter dutifully watered the baby panel, and after 2 weeks or so of tender care, he returned home from school one afternoon to find it had doubled in size.
Wow!
It was a particularly sunny week, so I wasn't surprised it had grown. I had convinced myself it was true. The care continued, and this wonder of nature repeated itself twice more until the panel measured 5 centimetres square.
Ooh.
Autumn followed, and winter meant that the panel obviously didn't get enough sun to grow anymore that year. In truth, the garden centre had stopped selling they'd stopped selling the little solar garden lights that I'd been dismantling. I really should have thought ahead and stocked up, but I was completely out, and so were they. Can't grow anymore. I must point out that I was not the only guilty party in this ruse, as family and friends all joined in merrily once they were primed, with the exception of his school teacher, who told him it was all nonsense. God bless the school teacher. But Carter quite often thinks he knows better than his teacher. So that was an easy obstacle to hurdle. The reason I now feel compelled to confess is twofold. On a recent mum's night out, i.e. wine-fueled evening of moaning/boasting about our offspring, I relayed the story of Carter's solar panel as requested by those who had heard about it through their children, and they were utterly horrified. They insisted I must come clean as I risked ruining his faith in humanity. I disagree. Carter has a wicked sense of humour, and part of me actually wonders if he's known all along and just enjoys watching me squirm. Secondly, he's about to sit a scholarship exam with an interview, and I'm slightly nervous that I may have ruined his chances should he get asked about his projects and he picks this one to talk about. Someone recently asked him how his panel was doing, and he said it hadn't grown recently, so he thinks it needs a bigger pot. So there is a distinct possibility that he really does believe me. I'm going to have to sit him down for a little chat in the next couple of weeks. Maybe seeing the look on his face will be punishment enough for me, says Jeanette. So I seek forgiveness from Carter. Obviously, I may have ruined his trust in adults forever. However, I do not seek forgiveness from his teacher for poo-pooing his theory, or more correctly, dismissing my perfect logic. Well, Jeanette, you know, whether you've taken this too far, I don't know. I think all you have to do is play Carter. I mean, Carter may well be listening at this point and now looking at you with those eyes which make you feel about 3 inches high. Anyway, let's see what Sister Bobby makes of that first of all.
What I love about this, I love the fact actually that you ran with it. You know, you started something and you just kept going and it got bigger and you didn't give it up. And
digging that hole.
Well, it wasn't, well, yes, in the plant pot and get a bigger one. What I loved it also, of course, he knew about nurturing plants. You know, you have to take care of it, you have to water it, maybe it needs a bigger plant, you have to be watchful of it, and also you have to be patient. So there's a kind of load of tenacity and patience that Carter's learning here, which I love. And whether he knows or not, well, I don't know. I think if you're coming clean now, and this is part of the coming cleanness, and he is listening, I think he should forgive you, because what he's got is a really inventful storytelling mum. So you're forgiven, by the way.
I'm now looking at this photograph again of Carter, who looks like a super proud, very excited 8-year-old, pointing with great glee and excitement at this pot, expecting wonderful things to happen, and wondering what he's going to be making of this.
And in a way they did, didn't they? Because it did grow, you know, it got bigger, so well. In fact, I think Carter comes out of this well, Jeanette comes out of this well. The only person who doesn't come out of this well is the school teacher, yet again. It's the school teacher going, oh no, I think you'll find the garden and grow the solar panels.
The school teacher is the voice of sanity in all this.
It turns out Father Christmas doesn't live in the smoke alarm, no. And always the school teachers with reason and logic. So I am going to forgive. I was hoping there was going to be a line about, well, when a mummy solar panel and a daddy solar panel love each other very much. I thought it was going to go down those lines. Sadly not, but I'm going to definitely forgive it.